Right, this is the lesson on measurement. So this is technically the third page because we did the warm-up. And so with the warm-up, that was 2 pages, and so this puts us on the third page. With this, we're going to take a look at some units and kind of how they're defined, or like where the names of these units came from, rather. This first part of the notes, I'm just going to go ahead and put some of the things we have written here. Zoom in on this a little bit. So kind of the main thing with this first part of the lesson, we talked about like where did these terms come from when we're talking about what is an inch, what is a yard, what is a foot. So with an inch was basically the width of a man's thumb. Oh, I'm sorry, I'm jumping ahead. I apologize. Let me see if I can get this to zoom in a little bit better. That looks better. Why is a foot called a foot? Well, a foot is called a foot because when they would measure things, they would literally like take steps to do it. So if you wanted to buy some rope, and this is before you could go down to Walmart and buy a tape measure, they would literally just lay out the rope and they would take steps to measure out the rope and then cut it for however much rope you wanted, right? And so they literally used their feet to do it. So people would use steps to measure. But then, you run into the issue. Well, this person's feet are smaller than another person's feet. So maybe I don't want the person with the smaller feet to step out the amount of rope I'm using because I'm going to get less. Or maybe the person selling it says, well, I don't want that person to do it because they have bigger feet, and then you're going to wind up getting more of my rope. And so they had to come up with a standard, and the standard the king came up with it wound up being they used the king's foot. So they'd like measure the king's foot and then have like, I don't know, pieces of wood or sticks or whatever that were measured that long, and then that would be the standard that you'd have to carry around the stick to do the measurements and stuff. And so that's why it was called a foot, because they literally used a person's foot to measure things. An inch is the width of a man's thumb. This one's crazy because it actually works really well. It works really well with my thumb. So if I put the ruler out here, and so I'm going to use like between 1 and 2 inches. If I stick my thumb in there, it fits like right in between 1 and 2 inches. So my thumb is just pretty much an inch wide, and that's fairly standard for the average size adult male, that the thumb width is in general about an inch. And so people would like measure things. They'd put their thumb down and they'd measure thumb widths to measure, to actually measure things for like commerce and stuff. And so that's where that term came from. A yard was the distance from the king's nose to his outstretched hand. So that was the distance for a yard. A mile actually comes from Roman times, and one stride was what they call 5 Roman feet, and so 1,000 Roman paces is what they called a mile. So if the Roman army was marching, I guess it was somebody's job to count the number of steps they took as they marched, and when they hit 1,000, they knew they did a mile. They had gone a mile. In this way, they could start to measure distances to different places, like how long would it take, how many miles is it, to go from Rome to whatever place they were going to. Fluid ounces doesn't have like a cool story like that. It used to be 160 fluid ounces per gallon. That's not true anymore. So I do believe it's like 128 fluid ounces per gallon. A cup was like the basic teacup. You remember a lot of this stuff came from England, so a lot of these, this like the British imperial system is what it used to be called. It's now called like the customary system. But this measurement system came from England, and so they drink a lot of tea there, and everyone has a teacup. So when you looked at a recipe and it said a cup, that means just use your teacup. But all teacups aren't necessarily the same size, so you don't get like really, really perfect measurement. Now we have cups that we can buy that are specific 1 cup measurements you could get at the store, and that are all uniform, so everyone can measure out the same amount. A pint was like a large cup that you usually used for beer. A quart just means 1/4, so a quart is just 1/4 of a gallon. But a gallon was basically just a bucket or a pail that you used to measure wine or ale. So once again, those might vary a little bit at that time, depending on who made the bucket, where you got it from, that kind of stuff. An ounce used to mean a 12th part. It's not true anymore. It's actually 16 ounces in a pound, so that's not true. The term pound comes from, I think this is a Latin word, the libra. And so that's why when we write the unit for pounds, we don't use P, we use LBS because it's still a carryover from this word. And then a ton was basically the quantity it took to fill a cask or a barrel. And we have a lot of alcohol-related units here. And so that's kind of the deal with this first page, was just to talk about where all this stuff came from. The reality of this is because people were just using what was handy. Well, my foot's right here. My thumb is right here. I have this teacup that's handy, right? And so people were using whatever they kind of had around them to do measurements, and it wasn't real standardized. And then when they tried to like standardize it together and say, okay, well then, if an inch is the width of a thumb, well, how many inches in a foot? And how many feet in a mile? And trying to standardize it, this is what we came up with, and this is on the back of your notes. So this is really a hot mess. Almost, the very few of these are actually the same numbers for conversions. Like, there's no other 1 to 5,280 conversion. 1 yard to 3 feet, well, you have 1 tablespoon to 3 teaspoons. So that's the only thing that's like a 1 to 3 ratio. 1 foot is 12 inches. That's the only one that exists. 1 gallon is 4 quarts. There's no other 1 to 4 ratio. There are 3 1 to 2 ratios. 1 quart is 2 pints, 1 pint is 2 cups, and 1 fluid ounce is 2 tablespoons. 1 cup is 8 fluid ounces, but 1 pound is 16 ounces. So those aren't even the same, and then 1 ton is 2,000 pounds. So like I said, this is a hot mess. And so scientists are like, this is awful. We need to find a better way to do this. And so they came up with a system that is much easier to use. So here we only have 3 main units. We have meters for distance, liters for volume, and grams for weight. And so we always measure distance in meters, but we can have different sizes. We'll talk about that in a second. Same thing with liters, same thing with grams. So, excuse me. A meter is about the length of a yard. It's around 3 feet. It's not exact. But if I'm measuring something, somewhat big, meters make sense. But if I want to measure something small, I might use something like centimeters. And your ruler has centimeters. So these sides on the ruler, that's your centimeter size. And so it takes 100 of these small units to make a meter. And so this metric system is based on our decimal system, which is a base 10 system. So everything works very much like our decimals work. And so like if I had 2.5 meters and I wanted to convert it to centimeters, I don't need to use some horrible conversion table up and memorize or try and figure out, oh man, how many is in what. It is literally moving the decimal to make it work. So here's meters, and this little staircase is to show how you could just change do the conversion pretty easily. So meters is here, centimeters is here. So if I want to convert 2.5 meters to centimeters, you literally look to see what direction and how many steps you take. So this is 2 steps, which means you're going to move the decimal 2 times, and you're going to move it right. So this decimal here at 2.5 moves 2 spaces to the right. If you have an empty space, you'll put a 0. And so 2.5 meters is exactly the same as 250 centimeters. So converting from one unit to the other is super easy to do. And that works in either direction. So if I went meters to kilometers, I would have to move 3 times to the left and once again fill the empty spaces with zeros. All right, so that covers that page. Please continue on to the next page.